Hello everyone. In this chapter, we will cover the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system is made up of two parts. We have the heart and blood vessels, and in the second part, we have the blood. This chapter in particular is going to focus first on the heart and the blood vessels, which actually play a very important role in our system and interacting with other systems. Now, as we cover this chapter, I want you to keep in mind a number of questions. First and foremost, what are the functions of the cardiovascular system? What are the different organs that are found in the cardiovascular system, including the heart, the blood vessels, and when we think blood vessels, we think arteries, veins, different dimensions of them, right? How is the heartbeat regulated? How does the heartbeat work? What is blood pressure? And what are some cardiovascular diseases and how to prevent them? Now, as we dive in the cardiovascular system, it is important to understand that the cardiovascular system interacts with many other systems, including the respiratory system. From the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system is going to get oxygen in and release carbon dioxide out. Also, the circulatory system is going to transport nutrients to tissues where they are going to take advantage of all these nutrients while releasing waste. So the cardiovascular system is going to take waste, right? The food we ingest is digested through our digestive system. The nutrients are absorbed and carried by the cardiovascular system, while anything that is not digestible is going to be released in the feces. And we have the urinary system that works in controlling blood pressure by acting on water-salt balance. In addition, you also have a close relationship between the cardiovascular system and the lymphatic system. And that lymphatic system is going to be focused on collecting the excess fluid that surrounds our tissues and returns that excess tissues that was collected to the cardiovascular system at some point. Now, what are the functions of the cardiovascular system? I already alluded somehow in these functions. One is transport. Transport of what? Transport of oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, hormones, waste, which are the byproduct of all our metabolic reactions, right? Another function is going to be protection. We have blood cells, specifically white blood cells, are going to play a very important role in our immune system, right? These blood cells are going to be transported to locations where they are going to be stored, waiting for an infection to come or their actions to be needed, right? Finally, but not least, you have a regulatory function. That regulatory function allows our body to maintain a relatively internal balance, right? Homeostasis. And this is going to be, for instance, maintaining the proper temperature in the body, maintaining the proper pressure in the body, and many other aspects of homeostasis. Now, the cardiovascular system is going to transport the blood and nutrients and waste. But the pipes and the heart, when we consider them, what is the circuit of the fluids in these pipes? So typically, if we start at the heart level, the blood is going to go from the heart to the arteries, from the arteries to arterioles that are smaller than arteries, and from arterioles to capillaries that are the smallest blood vessel that you can find in our system. And from the capillaries, the blood is going to flow in the venules, from the venules to the veins that are larger, and from the veins back to the heart. And we have a complete cycle of the blood through the circular system. Now, as we consider the blood vessels, both arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, and veins, there is a close relationship between structure and function. Now, before we dive into that relationship, let's first of all see how we can tell apart different organs of our circulatory system, and specifically arteries and veins. Overall, arteries and veins are similar in the fact that they always have 3 layers of tissue, if you will. You're going to have the outermost layer here. It's the connective tissues. Underneath of the connective tissues, you're going to have an inner layer here. This is made up of smooth muscles. And underneath of the smooth muscles, you're going to have a epithelium right here, which is going to be covering the surface of the blood vessel. That epithelium is simple squamous epithelium. That's a very important detail I want you to remember. But also, know that that epithelium carries a very specific name. That epithelium is called endothelium. I expect you to know that. So, 3 major layers: connective tissue, smooth muscle, and a epithelium, which is made up of a simple squamous epithelium, and that epithelium is called endothelium. So these layers, you're going to find the same in veins, right? So you have the connective tissue right here, okay? You're going to have the smooth muscle right here, and you're going to have the epithelium right here, the endothelium. With that being said, now let's take a look at the differences between arteries and veins. The major difference you are going to see here, it's the thickness of the smooth muscle layer. So here we have the smooth muscle layer here for the artery, and here we have the smooth muscle layer here for the vein. Notice that overall, the smooth muscle layer is much thicker in arteries compared to in the veins. That is a very important difference to notice. Now you have here a cross section of an artery, and here a cross-section of the equivalent vein. Now, let me mention that every single artery has its equivalent in vein. Notice that the veins are going to be larger than the artery, right, in terms of diameter. The layer of muscle is much larger in the arteries than they are in the vein, right? And that difference is because of their functions. The arteries have to handle the high blood pressure, the pressure of the blood that is sent from the heart, right? We have a very high pressure there, while the veins are carrying the blood from the tissues to the heart, which means that overall the blood pressure is going to be lower in veins than it is in arteries. So arteries have to be thicker compared to veins. So this is the close association between structure and function for veins and arteries. Okay? Arteries have to tolerate high blood pressure, while veins do not have to tolerate high blood pressure, right? Now, to deal with that high blood pressure, the arteries have to have a thicker layer of smooth muscle. Now, with that said, the arteries are characteristic in the fact that they carry blood away from the heart. I want you to remember that. They carry blood away from the heart. They are made up of 3 layers, as I mentioned. A epithelium that is thin. It's a simple squamous epithelium that is called endothelium. Remember that. Endothelium. Oops. Sorry about that. We have a thick, smooth muscle layer and other connective tissue. We already covered that. You know that. The arterioles are much smaller than arteries. And because they are smaller than arteries, they can do something arteries cannot do, which is actually to regulate blood pressure. They can regulate blood pressure by squeezing. But that's another story. I'm not going to bug you with that. But I want you to remember that arterioles are smaller than arteries. 1. 2, they are involved in regulating blood pressure. How about the capillaries? The capillaries are the smallest blood vessels you can find in the body. The smallest blood vessel you can find in the body are considerably different from arteries and arterioles, and even venules and veins, in the sense that while arteries and veins are made up of 3 layers of tissues, the capillaries are made up of only 1 single layer of tissue. I expect you to know that. 1 single layer of tissue, it's the epithelium. And that epithelium, it's a simple squamous epithelium. So you have the epithelium or endothelium, then you have a basement membrane. And after that, you have the tissues, right? So the tissues for exchange of material. Now, the question you may ask is, wait a minute, why are capillary made up of only endothelium? Well, the reason is very simple. The capillaries, it's where exchange of nutrients and waste has to happen, right? For that exchange to be efficient, you need as little amount of material as possible making up the walls. That's 1. 2, you need that wall to be as thin as possible, which is the rationale for having a simple squamous epithelium making up the capillaries. I want you to remember that, right? So there are microscopic vessels between arterioles and venules, that's where you find them. Okay? They are made up of one layer of epithelial tissue that we call endothelium, right? They form beds of vessels. And these beds of vessels allow for exchange of material, including nutrients, right? Oxygen, carbon dioxide, amino acid, simple sugars, nucleotide, you name it, right? But also waste is also exchanged there, right? So together, the capillaries are going to constitute what we call a capillary bed. That capillary bed is going to allow for a large surface area, which is favorable for exchange of material, whether you are thinking in terms of nutrients or you are thinking in terms of waste. You have to make the system of exchange very efficient, right? And to make it efficient, you need to increase the surface area. Now, the venules and veins. The venules are smaller than veins. They receive the blood that come from arterioles and capillaries, and then going to send that blood in the veins, and eventually from the veins to the heart, right? The venules and veins are going to have three layers, as I already mentioned. An endothelium, okay? Thin, smooth muscle, other connective tissue. The veins, very importantly, I want you to remember that. They carry the blood toward the heart. Now, in large veins, the large veins are going to have some valves. These valves are essential for preventing a backflow of the blood as the blood is being carried toward the heart, right? And why do they need to stand there for backflow? The reason is that the veins typically are going to carry blood against gravity. Think, for instance, of the veins that are in your legs, right? The veins that are in your legs have to push the blood up to the heart, right? And these veins, they have to have these valves so that the blood doesn't fall back in your feet, right? I hope that you can have a picture of the image I'm trying to show here. Now, let's take a look at the heart. The heart, it's a huge muscle. That muscle is actually called the myocardium. That myocardium is very characteristic in the fact that the muscle fibers are somehow oriented toward the same direction, right? There are some other characteristics. You remember in the previous chapter, we said that the cardiac muscle is going to be made up of cells that are branched, and you are going to have some structures between cells that we call intercalated discs. And these intercalated discs are dark in color when we look at them under a microscope. This is the areas where the gap junctions are going to be found for communication to occur between neighboring cells, right? I want you to remember that. So anyway, let's come back here. The heart, it's a muscular organ that is made up mainly of a cardiac muscle called myocardium. I want you to know that. The heart is surrounded with a membrane. That membrane makes up a sac. That sac is called the pericardium. The heart is made up of two sides. You have the left side, you have the right side, and both are separated by a layer of muscle that we call the septum, right? That's the wall that we call the septum that separate the left and the right side. You're going to have four chambers in the heart. You have two top chambers and two lower chambers. The top chambers are called atria. So you're going to have the right atrium and the left atrium. And the lower chambers are called ventricles. So we're going to have the left ventricle and the right ventricle. Between the atria and the ventricles, you are going to have some valves. These valves are called the atrioventricular valves. Atrium, ventricular, ventricle, and valves, right? And now, leaving the heart or coming into the heart, you are going to have two valves. These valves are called the semilunar valves. These semilunar valves are going to be found in the largest artery that comes from the heart to carry the blood away from the heart, and the largest vein that actually carries the blood away from, in the heart. All right? So, these valves, both the atrioventricular valves and the semilunar valves, are going to close and shut depending on where the blood is located, right? And as they close and open, they're going to produce a sound. The closure is going to cause the production of a sound lub and dub, right? During the heartbeat. So you hear when you put your ear to someone's chest, you're going to hear kubum, kubum, kubum. So that sound, it's basically the lub and the dub. That's the sound of valves that are shutting, right? Atrioventricular valves and the semilunar valves. So this slide, it's really to kind of show you a graphic representation of the heart, right? With the right side and the left side, right? So we're going to have the top chambers, the atria, right here. We're going to have the lower chambers, the ventricles, right here. And you can have here the right ventricle, the left ventricle, the right atrium, the left atrium. So if you follow the arrow, you're going to see that's the left atrium. This is the right atrium, okay? Right ventricle, left ventricle. Now, obviously here you cannot see the septum, right? But the septum is going to be located here. We are going to take a look at it when we look at a cross-section of this of the heart. Now, you also have some major veins right here bringing blood in the heart. These major veins are called the vena cava. Okay, you have the inferior vena cava right here and the superior vena cava right here, right? And then we are going to have the aorta right here that actually brings the blood from the left ventricle toward the tissues. All right, so I want you to remember the aorta as well. Now, let's go inside of the heart. Inside of the heart, you are going to see the myocardium right here making up the walls. Okay, you are going to notice the atrioventricular valves right here. You are going to have the semilunar valve right here and somewhere here. This is the right atrium, the left atrium, the right ventricle right here, the left ventricle right here. And you are going to also notice that between the left ventricle and the right ventricle, there is a difference in terms of the thickness of the wall. So the left ventricle is much thicker than the right ventricle right here, which speaks to how much the right ventricle has to squeeze and send out the blood to the tissues with very high pressure, right? While the right side here receives the blood that comes from the tissues. So there is no need for a very high pressure to happen there. Therefore, the layer of muscle is less thick than the layer of muscle in the left ventricle, right? So please review the structure of the heart. You are going to be tested on that. Now, this is basically to now dive into the blood flow. When the blood comes in the heart and goes out of the heart, basically what is the pathway? Well, the inferior and superior vena cava are going to bring the blood to the right atrium. So they dump the blood into the right atrium. As they dump the blood into the right atrium, that blood now is going to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle. From there, from the right ventricle, the blood is going to be squeezed and go in the lungs. There, in the lungs, that blood is going to be releasing carbon dioxide and taking in oxygen. And they take the blood to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. Now, these pulmonary arteries are called pulmonary arteries because they carry the blood from the heart, right side of the ventricle, right, to the lungs. Remember, arteries are any blood vessel that carry blood away from the heart, right? These are the two pulmonary arteries. And here, if we come back here, we are going to see the two pulmonary arteries. So we have the right pulmonary artery, right here, and the left pulmonary artery right here. So the right pulmonary artery are right here. I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So I was saying, okay, not vein, but artery right here. I'm sorry, right here, artery. Okay. So we are here and here. You see they are blue. The reason why they are blue, it's because the blood they carry to the tissues is loaded with carbon dioxide and poor in oxygen. That's why you have that color, right? By definition, though, arteries carry the blood away from the heart. Now, then from there, in the heart, in the lungs, the blood is going to be loaded with oxygen and get rid of carbon dioxide. At that point, the blood is now going to turn a bright red and not dark red as initially. So now the blood is going to now leave the lungs loaded with oxygen to go in the heart. To go in the heart, remember, blood vessels that carry blood to the heart are called veins, right? So now the blood is going to go through the pulmonary veins, and they are going to dump that blood in the left atrium. In the left atrium. So let me take you here. So the blood is now going to come to the heart through this blood vessel here, the right pulmonary vein, and here the left pulmonary vein, right? The left pulmonary vein. Now, all right, and that blood gets dumped in here, in the left atrium. And from there, the blood is going to be squeezed from the left atrium to the left ventricle. And from the left ventricle to the aorta to leave the heart and be sent out in the tissues. All right, so we are here in the left atrium, and from the left atrium to the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle to the largest blood artery, right, the aorta, and from the aorta to the rest of the body. And eventually, the blood is going to be pumped back to each vena cava. So one vena cava, two vena cavae. Cavae. There we go. All right. So I did tell you that the heart is made up of myocardium, and that the myocardium is made up of cells that are branched, right? These are cardiac muscle cells that are branched. And I did tell you about intercalated discs, right? And that these intercalated discs are dark under a microscope, right? You can see the intercalated discs here. And these intercalated discs, this is where you are going to find these gap junctions that allow a communication between two neighboring cells. This is strategic because this allows two neighboring cells to share information so that in a relatively short period of time and almost instantly, when the impulse comes in one cell, before that cell gets the chance to respond to the impulse, a neighboring cell has already received the same information and ready to provide a response, which causes the whole heart, so all this organ, to function as a syncytium. Okay? Now, what we mean is that they're going to beat as a unit. When ventricles contract, it's not one that contracts. It's not the left only or the right only. It's both left and right at the same time. When atria contract, it's not left only or right only. It's both at the same time. Left and right atrium contract at the same time. One. Then two, right and left ventricles are going to contract at the same time. All right? So this is made possible because of the gap junctions that exist between cells, and these gap junctions are located in the intercalated discs. Okay? Please remember that. So, how do the structure of blood vessels and heart match their function? I already mentioned this, right? I already mentioned this. I said the left part of the heart is much thicker than the right part of the heart because the left heart has to pump the blood to the tissues. So away from the heart and to the tissues, that require much strength compared to the right side that actually receives the blood and sends that blood to the lungs. That's one for the heart. Now, for the arteries and veins, we know and we already mentioned that the walls of the arteries are going to be much thicker than the walls of veins, because the walls of arteries have to withstand a high blood pressure compared to the walls of veins. And that is the reason why you have that that structure, right? So we have there an association between structure and function. All right. So how about the heartbeat? The heartbeat is going to be recorded with some devices, right? You have devices that are able to record when atria contract, when they relax, when ventricles contract, and when they relax. Now, we are going to use some terminologies to be very specific as to what we are talking about. Now, we specifically talk about systole and diastole. Now, what is systole? Systole, it's an event that occurs during the heartbeat, right? That during the heartbeat, you're going to have that the atria are going to contract together, followed by a contraction of the ventricles. That's systole. And diastole, it's basically a relaxation of the muscles, right? So during diastole, you have a relaxation of the atria and the ventricles. That's diastole, right? So the cardiac cycle, it's basically as we go from systole, contraction of the chambers, to diastole, relaxation of the chamber, and back to systole, that's another cycle, right? So the cardiac cycle or heartbeat can be quantified, right? In a healthy individual, on average, a healthy adult, on average, you have about 70 heartbeats per minute. That's on average. Now, that number can vary from one individual to another, right? Depending on your physical fit, right? Are you an athlete? Are you somebody who is most of the time sedentary? In which case, you are going to have different heartbeat rate. Now, let's take a look at the cardiac cycle in detail. So we are going to start where the blood comes in the atria. So this is where the blood is. And the blood that is in the right atrium comes from vena cava. The right and left, the superior and inferior vena cava, while the blood that is on the left atrium comes from the lungs, right? So now that the blood is here, the vena cava, the atria are going to squeeze. They're going to contract. And as they contract, they push the blood in they push the blood in the ventricles, both left and right ventricles, right? So as they push that blood in the ventricles, the semilunar valves are going to be shut. They have to, right? They have to be shut. Then that blood flows in the ventricles. And there, as it flows in the ventricles, now the blood will have to be sent away from the ventricles, which means that the atria are going to relax when the ventricles are squeezing both left and right, right? When the left and right ventricles are squeezing, the blood is sent to both the lungs, the blood that comes from the right side, and the organs, the blood that comes from the left side of the heart, right? And as this blood flows through the semilunar valves, the atrioventricular valves will shut, right? So that shut is going to cause a noise, right? When atrioventricular valves shut, you hear a noise that is called the lump. When semilunar valve shut, whether you are here or here, you hear the duck, right? So now that the blood leaves the ventricles, after that, the ventricles are going to relax. And as the ventricle relax, the whole heart is going to come at a rest situation, right? The time for the blood to fill again the atria right here, and here the semilunar valves closing. Okay, so that's the cycle of the heartbeat. Now, how is the heartbeat controlled? The heartbeat is controlled two ways. You have an internal control and an external control. In the internal control, the organ itself, the heart, has an internal system to control itself, right? That internal control starts with a particular area that is called the sinoatrial node. Sinoatrial node. The sinoatrial node. That sinoatrial node, it's located at a particular area. Let me show you right here. It's located right here. Okay? This is where the impulse, the electric impulse, is going to be initially initiated. Right? This is called the pacemaker. Pacemaker. It determines when the heart is beating or when it's not beating, right? The pacemaker. So that impulse, electric impulse, is going to travel in the tissue of the heart here, in the atrium. Then it is going to hit another center that is called the atrioventricular node. Atrium, ventricular, ventricle. So it's a node that is located between the atrium, and you can see this is the atrium, and the ventricle, this is ventricle node. From there, the atrioventricular node is going to spread the impulse through some nervous tissue here. And that nervous tissue is going to be organized in bundle and then spread throughout the muscle tissue. Now, there is one particular bundle I would like to share with you here. You have a branch that happens here, and that branch happens because this right side has to be innervated, and the left side also has to be innervated, right? And these branches are called the Purkinje fibers. These Purkinje fibers are literally like highways where the electric impulse travels to basically be able to be spread throughout the myocardium, causing the heart to respond as a unit. So this is true in terms of response as a unit. This is true for the heart as to we are talking whether we are talking about the atria contracting as a unit or we're talking about the ventricle contracting as a unit, right? We have this this highway of nervous tissue that allows the information to circulate really fast. Okay, let me come back here. So we talked about the sinoatrial node that is located on the right atrium. That's where the signal is initiated. And then it's going to follow and go to the atrioventricular node. And from there, the impulse is going to travel through bundles of tissues and the Purkinje fibers, tissues, very specifically nervous tissue, right? And this is going to cause a contraction as a unit, and the information travels so fast because of the gap junctions, right, that are located at intercalated discs. Then we have an external control. That external control is happening in the brain, and hormones also are involved. What are some examples of hormones that are involved in an external control? Hormones such as epinephrine or adrenaline and norepinephrine or noradrenaline, right? All right, so we talked about this, and here you are shown the gap junctions where the information is flowing from one cell to another neighboring cell. Now, how about the electrocardiogram? So this, we can start tackling this in another video. So for now, let's stop our video here, and we resume the next video in a minute.